Now, in this week of the course, we're going to deal with a very tricky issue, the issue of the relationship between Indigenous people around the world and physics. I should start off the section by making an acknowledgement of country that I am filming this and you are probably watching it on the lands, the ancestral lands of the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people, whose ancestors have been in these areas of Canberra for many tens of thousands of years. This is land that was stolen from them, but their culture and relationship to the land still exists today. Now, physics research can have many impacts on Indigenous people, both good and bad. It could result in their land being used for nuclear weapons testing at one extreme, or it could supply clean, renewable energy to remote communities on the other hand, good and bad. And unless we understand these relationships, we could easily make much more bad and not so much of a good impact. But it also works the other way round. Scientists often need to use land over which Indigenous people have power, and protests and campaigns against the scientific use by Indigenous people has on many occasions completely stopped scientific work on these lands in various cases. So it's an increasingly important skill for any physicist or any scientist to understand Indigenous perspectives and know how to negotiate them, because quite apart from trying to do as much good for Indigenous communities as possible, getting it wrong can also lead to enormous problems, delays, expense, and even stopping the research. So the outline. I'll start off with some introduction to Indigenous people in Australia and around the world. You may know this stuff already, in which case you can skip this, but especially for international students, you probably won't know very much about the Indigenous people of Australia, so I want to give some background. I'm going to talk about Indigenous land rights. Do Indigenous people have control over their ancestral lands? And what sort of control do they have? Talk about some examples of the conflicts, mostly focusing on what I know best, which is astronomy, the enormous clashes that have happened in some parts of the world between astronomers and Indigenous people, and how it's stopping a lot of research. Then a good use of science to help Indigenous people, renewable energy for remote communities in Australia. And then finally, we'll talk about nuclear weapons testing, which has been a major issue for Indigenous people and many other people